That's a real problem. Because that relates to an issue of fear. And the fear is the most importantly manipulatable political reality. And there is the idea of that the political system, you think the blog is, what did you say, that the blog was a conversation without yelling? I don't know, it's louder than any person who's ever yelled in my ear, you know, because the blog is kind of uncensored expression without any editor or audience, no control. And it's good. I think it's good because people blow off steam. You just have to change how we read because But what's very important about the fear factor about what's happening in the environment, because it's out of our control. Unlike many things we fear, there's very little the individual thinks he or she can do. So I recycle more. I live with a lot of sweaters. I roller skate to work. I do all the things I'm supposed to do. But yeah, I know I don't have to be a statistician to know that my individual behavior, especially if you start to talk to me about, controlling China, well, we can barely control ourselves. So even if I'm a good boy or a good girl, it have no difference. It's, going to happen. Disaster is going to strike. So that fear has huge political consequences and dangers of its being manipulated. Because the one thing that would be easy to create an environmentally sound populace would be the removal of freedom. Can't do this, can't do that, don't do this, can't, restrict mobility of freedom and so forth and so on. So that's right. Whatever it is, I don't have an opinion about it, but that's the context which I think about the problem. The other two things is the leadership has to show that there aren't good and bad here in a kind of black and white way. The two things that are innovation and adaptation. So the situation will change. And we will have to adapt, and that will have to change our behavior. Now, that adaptation is interesting. Is that adaptation going to result in the cities being reborn because commuting, for example, becomes environmentally implausible, or the cities being abandoned because people have to go to higher ground, to live? Does it mean real changes in lifestyle? Real changes in lifestyle, not nominal changes, so that's one adaptation, which could be viewed together with nostalgia as sacrifice, which people don't like. Delayed gratification, they really want that, that sports car that really burns real gasoline, I don't know what they want, but something that is, so that's one issue. And the other would be innovation. So the extreme notion that is there some way we can save the planet and invent ourselves out of a situation in which we have to give up our freedoms? We are reduced as an important political actor because our individual behavior is irrelevant. And only massive collective behavior will make a difference. So we are forced into kind of uniformity. So is there some way out of that box? And that is the adaptation. Can we, find an environmentally sound way to transport ourselves one place to the next and travel about? Suddenly, there was this thing about airline travel, no more airline travel. Well, yeah, it might be a good thing. The return of purely provincial life might be a good thing. Why do I have to worry about what happens in Paris, London, Berlin, or Moscow, right? Why should I presume that I can go 8 times a year to places far away? Why not just be happy in Annandale? No? And
sounds like a bumper sticker.
Yeah, be happy in Annandale. So, I don't have to do it. I don't have to travel. I don't have to think about the larger world. I can think about it in my imagination. I've never understood tourism. The death of tourism would be a good thing, would be a very good thing. It would be economically hard to adjust. And instead of going to New York City, I have a virtual tour of New York City, which is harmless environmentally. And okay, but that, how do we get there, and do we have to get there? And is there an innovative way to, through science and technology and engineering, to adapt? Because we're going to have to adapt no matter how well we behave. Change is going to be there, and that change could be very dramatic. And how do we adapt to that without fear and without nostalgia and without losing our sense of our individual value?
Do you want to respond to that?
Well, just very quickly, one thing I think that's an important, a vital element in considering where we're at right now as a species and then how to get from here to there, meaning some roughly stable population with a rough sense that everyone is not living in misery, other than the 1% who are incredibly rich, which is kind of where we're sort of headed now. And one thing that has to be considered, I think, is just out-of-the-box thinking. With something like climate, if it's being thought of in the 20th century tradition of a pollution problem, I think that we're bound to fail. If it's only seen as, well, it's up to Congress. We have to pass a bill, and if we pass a bill, then there'll be a regulation. The regulation will limit the gases, and everyone will innovate and come up with clean energy. The more I've studied this problem for 20 years, the more it's clear that that model will not work with something that's fundamentally an energy technology question. How do you provide the amenities that come with abundant energy that we've been not suckered, but that we've enjoyed for 200 years based on fossil fuels? How do you get those amenities, the livelihood that's been afforded that way, the productivity of crops, everything, moving water. Water is electricity in many places. How do you do that in a new way? And if we just think about it as a pollution problem, then we're going to fail.
Yeah,
so
I think that's
trait.
Undoubtedly the case.
If I want to say, the one thing that I would say that needs to be brought into this consideration is, if there's one thing that links to the rich-poor question that is clearly ahead of us in the adaptation, is the issue of population migration.
Yeah.
You know, if you have Russia losing population, you have Western Europe losing population, and then the environmental changes will continue to pressure populations to more livable places. And one of the things that will be extremely hard politically, we've already seen it, is the increase in the rate of migration, partly for environmental and economic reasons, and our mental capacity to adapt to that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, so I want to step back from something actually that you said here, which is that we need to, that if we want to cultivate leadership, it has to be leadership that frames the issue in terms of opportunity rather than fear. And it's been said that Martin Luther King didn't give an "I have a nightmare" speech. And that, you know, environmentalists have been roundly condemned, and rightly so, for preaching hellfire and brimstone, and that there's a, you know...
well, pollution, I think your point, it's absolutely terrific, because Andy's right. Pollution has a moral overtone. Yeah. You're polluting my moral. You use the same word about morality. It's cleanliness. And then Ben Franklin, godliness, you know, and it has, it's, you know, pollution, your language is polluted. We can use this word in ways which give it its moral edge, which speaks to...
But what I would say to you, I mean, without a moral edge, will we actually marshal the resources that are necessary to avoid a runaway greenhouse scenario, which would generate what, you know, Harvard economist, as I mentioned earlier, Marty Weitzman has called, you know, heading towards terra incognita biosphere, an unrecognizable world for our children. And that is using that apocalyptic language. I'm an economist, I tend not to do that. But the more I look at this particular problem, as opposed to the first generation of environmental issues, the more I see that as a possibility. And so, to me, this is a really interesting question. Should it be a moral issue? Should it not?